The snow hadn't stopped falling since noon, and neither had my father's voice. "If you can't respect your brother in this house, then take your daughter and go." Those words landed harder than anything I'd faced in 18 years of service. Harder than mortar fire. Harder than the day I identified my husband's personal effects in a windowless room at Dover. I stood there in my dress uniform, my daughter's small hand gripping mine, watching my father throw my duffel bags into the snow like they were garbage. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that some battles you don't fight with your voice, you fight them with your silence, and you win them later. I'd been counting down to this leave for 4 months. 4 months of sleeping in 14-hour shifts. 4 months of freeze-dried meals and radio attic. 4 months of missing Emma's 8th birthday because I was 3,000 meters away, making sure other people's daughters still had a mother to come home to. When my co finally signed off on Christmas leave, I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time since summer. I called my mother that same night, my voice cracking a little when I said, "We're coming home for Christmas," she cried. I let myself believe that meant something. I packed carefully, not just uniforms and civilian clothes, but gifts I'd spent weeks choosing. A leather-bound journal for my father, the kind he used to keep before arthritis took his handwriting from him. A cashmere scarf for my mother. The deep red she always said she loved but never bought for herself. Books and art supplies for my brother's kids, who I hadn't seen grow an inch in 3 years, because deployments don't wait for family. And tucked into the inside pocket of my coat, a check made out to my parents for the roof repair they'd been putting off since spring money I'd been setting aside from every paycheck for the last year. Never mentioning it, never asking for credit. Emma sat beside me on the flight home, drawing snowmen on the fogged-up window, asking me every 20 minutes if Grandma's house would have a real fireplace. I told her yes. I told her it would be the best Christmas we'd had in years. I believed it when I said it. My family has never understood what I do. To them, the army was always something lesser. Not a calling, not a sacrifice, just a strange detour I'd taken instead of settling down properly. My brother Jason built his identity on being the successful one. Even though he hadn't held a steady job in almost 6 years and still lived off our parents' goodwill in the house he grew up in, he had opinions about everything and responsibility for nothing. I used to hope that would change. By that Christmas, I'd stopped hoping. I'd just stopped mentioning it. Dinner started well enough. The table was set with my mother's good china, the one that only came out twice a year. Emma sat between my parents, glowing under their attention, and for 20 minutes I let myself relax into something close to peace. Then Jason opened his second beer and started in. "So, how's the army treating you, Abby? Still playing soldier?" He smiled like it was a joke between friends, not an insult wrapped in sugar. I said nothing, just pass the potatoes. He kept going. "Must be nice ditching your kid for months at a time and calling it patriotism." My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My father said nothing. I looked at Emma, who had gone very quiet, very small in her chair, and I felt something old and tired settle over me. The exhaustion of defending a life I never should have had to defend at my own family's table. "I'm not ditching her," I said quietly. "I'm serving my country. There's a difference." Jason laughed short and mean. "Sure, meanwhile, your kid's growing up without a dad and barely sees her mom. Real hero move." I felt my jaw tighten, but I held it. 8 years of losing Marcus had taught me how to carry grief without letting it show on my face in public. I could carry this too. I told myself I just had to get through dinner. For Emma. For the fragile idea of family I still wanted to believe in. Then Jason reached for the wine bottle, and in one deliberate motion, he tipped it toward the chair beside him, toward my duffel bag, still packed with my dress uniform for the drive back. Red wine bled across the canvas, soaking into the fabric, dripping onto my mother's hardwood floor. He smirked at me like he'd won something. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said that was uncalled for. That was when my father rose from his chair, red-faced, furious. Not at Jason, but at me. "You've been sitting there with that attitude all night," he snapped. "If you can't respect your brother in this house, then take your daughter and go." The room went silent. My mother didn't move. Jason didn't say a word in my defense. My father walked to the front door, threw it open, and one by one hauled my bags out into the snow-covered yard, tossing them like they meant nothing, like 18 years of service, of sacrifice, of showing up for people who never showed up for me, weighed less than his pride. In that moment, Emma started crying, confused and frightened, asking why Grandpa was so angry. I didn't answer her. I couldn't, not without my voice breaking. I walked outside into the cold, knelt down in the snow, and gathered my bags one by one, the wine-soaked duffel, heaviest of all. Then I took my daughter's hand, and without looking back at the house, or the family standing frozen in the doorway, I walked us both to the car. Behind me, the door closed. Ahead of me, the road was dark, and the snow was falling harder. I didn't know yet that in less than 12 hours the whole country would know my name, and my family would finally understand exactly who they had thrown out into the cold. The motel sign buzzed pink and blue against the snow, half its letters burned out, so it read only hotel vacancy. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and warm was all I needed after the night we'd had. I checked us into a room at the end of the row, away from the highway noise, and Emma sat on the edge of the bed, still in her good Christmas dress, her small shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that comes after a child has held it in for too long. I sat beside her and pulled her into my lap, even though at 8 she insisted she was too big for that most days. Tonight, she let me. I smoothed her hair back from her face and waited for her breathing to slow before she finally spoke. "Mom, does Grandpa hate you?" The question hit somewhere deep, somewhere I usually kept armored. I thought about lying to her, softening it into something easier to carry, but Emma had grown up around honesty, around briefings and debriefs, and a mother who told her the truth even when it was hard, and I owed her the same now. "No, baby, he doesn't hate me. He's just angry. And sometimes angry people say and do things that hurt the people they love most." I didn't fully believe my own words, but I needed her to believe them at least tonight. She nodded slowly, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and asked if we could still have Christmas, just the two of us. I told her we would. I promised her hot chocolate from the vending machine and a movie on the ancient motel TV, and for a little while, we found something like peace in that small rented room, wrapped in blankets that smelled like bleach and cheap detergent, the heater rattling in the corner like an old friend. She fell asleep around 9, curled against my side, one hand still fisted in the fabric of my sleeve, like she was afraid I might disappear too. I lay there in the dark for a long time, staring at the water-stained ceiling, running through the night's events like an after-action report. I cataloged it clinically, the way I'd been trained to catalog chaos. Jason's comments, my father's fury, the wine on my uniform, the snow on my duffel bags, because if I let myself feel it instead of file it, I wasn't sure what would happen. My phone buzzed against the nightstand at 11:47 p.m. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost told myself that whatever it was could wait until morning, that I had earned one night without duty pulling at me. But 18 years of service doesn't let you ignore a call at that hour. "Not really." I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Emma. It was my XO, and his voice had the particular tightness that meant something had already gone wrong and was still going wrong. A National Guard helicopter, running a night training exercise near the mountains, had gone down in white-out conditions. 2 crew members were confirmed alive, but injured coordinates were unstable, and weather was worsening by the hour. They needed someone experienced in mountain rescue coordination, someone who had run joint operations before, someone who could stand in the middle of chaos and make it make sense. They needed me. I didn't hesitate, not because I didn't feel the pull of the sleeping child beside me, but because I'd built my entire adult life around a simple truth: when people are trapped in the dark and the cold, waiting for someone to come find them, you do not let personal circumstances stand between you and getting to them. I'd lost Marcus to a mission that went wrong in ways no one could have prevented. I was not going to lose 2 more soldiers to a night I could have helped fix. I woke Emma, gently explained, as simply as I could, that Mommy had to go help some people who were in trouble the same way I always had, and watched her nod with the strange practiced maturity of a military kid who understood duty before she understood most things. I made calls in the parking lot while she got dressed, arranging for her to stay with the Ramirez family, old friends from my previous posting, people I trusted with her life without question, people who'd taken her in on short notice more than once before. I drove her there myself through the snow. The roads nearly empty my headlights, the only light for long stretches of highway. At their door, Emma hugged me tight around the neck and whispered, "Go help them, Mom, I'll be okay." Something in my chest cracked open at that. My daughter, 8 years old, comforting me on my way out the door to save strangers' lives. I changed into fresh uniform in the car, the wine-stained one left behind in the motel room, and drove straight to the staging area, where a task force was already assembling under floodlights and falling snow. No one there knew about the dinner. No one there knew my father had thrown my bags into a snowbank 6 hours earlier. Out there, none of that mattered. Out there, I was only Lieutenant Colonel Turner, and there were 2 soldiers on a mountainside who needed someone to bring them home. I climbed into the command vehicle, pulled up the terrain maps, and got to work. Whatever my family thought of me, whatever they believed about who I was and what my service meant, none of it changed what I had to do next. Somewhere on that mountain, in that whiteout, people were waiting. I wasn't going to let them wait long. By 4 a.m., the command post was a controlled storm of activity radios, crackling headlamps, cutting through the dark snow chains, being fitted onto trucks that would carry rescue teams as far up the mountain as the roads allowed. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't thought about anything except grid coordinates and wind speeds, and the 2 names on the manifest that mattered more than anything else in the world right now. Corporal Diaz and Specialist Whitfield, 23 and 26 years old, both with families waiting by phone somewhere, just like mine had been hours before. I'd run enough operations to know the difference between organized chaos and real danger. And this was real danger. Visibility was under 50 feet in places. Temperatures were dropping into the single digits. The terrain was unforgiving, even in daylight, let alone in a whiteout with 2 injured soldiers unable to move far from the wreckage. I made the calls that needed making, splitting teams, coordinating with the National Guard's aviation unit for a weather window, keeping constant contact with Diaz, who was conscious and terrified, and doing an admirable job, keeping his voice steady over a radio that kept cutting in and out. Somewhere around dawn, a local news van showed up at the perimeter of the staging area, drawn by scanner traffic about a downed aircraft. I barely registered it. I had a job to do, and reporters were the least of my concerns. I stood at the hood of the command vehicle, in my cold weather gear, breath fogging in the air, directing teams up the ridgeline, while a cameraman I never even looked at captured every minute of it from a distance. I didn't know until much later that the footage had gone out live on the local morning broadcast. A woman in army fatigues, standing calm and unshaken in the middle of a blizzard, calling out coordinates with the kind of authority that made grown men move without question. I didn't know that a producer at the affiliate station, hungry for a Christmas morning story with heart, had pulled my name off a public affairs release and put it on screen in bold white letters. I didn't know that within 2 hours, a national network had picked up the footage, because rescue stories on Christmas morning are exactly the kind of thing that makes people stop scrolling and start watching. I was 300 meters away, kneeling in the snow beside Specialist Whitfield's stretcher, checking a splint one of my medics had set when all of that was happening. I had no idea my face was on television screens across the country. I had no idea that in a warm, quiet living room decorated with the same ornaments I'd hung as a child, my family was staring at that same screen in stunned silence. My mother told me later that she'd turned on the news out of habit, some Christmas morning ritual older than any of us, expecting nothing but weather and parade coverage. Instead, she saw me, filthy, frostbitten at the edges, unmistakably in command, my name displayed beneath the footage, in letters too large to argue with Lieutenant Colonel Abigail Turner, U.S. Army leading rescue operation. She said. My father set down his coffee cup so hard it cracked the saucer. Jason apparently said nothing at all for almost a full minute, which for a man who always had something to say was its own kind of confession. My mother told me his exact words once he found his voice again. That can't be the same Abby. As if the sister he'd mocked at the dinner table the night before couldn't possibly be the same woman commanding a mountainside rescue on national television. As if the two versions of me were so incompatible that his mind simply refused to hold them both at once. I don't know exactly what passed between my parents and my brother in that living room while I worked. I can only imagine it, the slow, sick recognition creeping over each of them as the anchor described my service, record, my rank, my role in coordinating what was quickly becoming a successful, high-profile rescue. I imagine my father's hand shaking. I imagine my mother crying, not from pride, exactly, not yet, but from the horrifying arithmetic of what they'd done the night before, to the woman now being called a hero on national television. By the time we brought both soldiers down off that mountain, alive, hypothermic, injured, but alive, my phones, still sitting untouched in the console of my truck, had already begun filling with missed calls. I wouldn't see them for hours. I was too busy making sure Diaz and Whitfield got into the medevac helicopter, too busy debriefing my team, too busy being exactly who I'd always been, whether anyone in my family had ever bothered to notice or not. When I finally climbed into the truck as the sun broke weakly over the ridge line, exhaustion hit me all at once, the adrenaline draining out and leaving something hollow and heavy behind. I picked up my phone out of habit, more from muscle memory than curiosity. 43 missed calls stared back at me. Every single one from my family. I didn't call back. Not yet. I drove instead toward the Ramirez house, toward my daughter, toward the only Christmas morning that actually mattered to me. Whatever was happening back at my parents' house, whatever they were feeling now, watching, realizing none of it changed what they'd already done. It just meant they finally understood who they'd done it to. I picked Emma up from the Ramirez house a little before noon, and the first thing she did was throw her arms around my neck and ask if the people on the mountain were okay. I told her, yes, all of them, and felt her whole body relax against mine. She didn't know yet that the rest of the world had spent the morning watching her mother on television. Neither did I, not fully. Not until I finally sat down in my truck. Emma buckled in beside me, eating a granola bar, and looked at my phone again. The missed calls had climbed past 50 by then. Voicemails I hadn't listened to. Texts stacking up faster than I could read them. My mother's messages moved from confused to frantic to something close to hysterical. Each one time-stamped closer to the last. Abby, call me. Abby, is that you on the news? Abby, please. I need to hear your voice. My father hadn't texted at all. He wasn't the type, but he'd called 11 times himself, which told me more than any message could have. I didn't answer right away, not out of spite, though I understood later why some people assumed that. I didn't answer because I was exhausted in a way that went beyond sleep, and because some part of me needed a few more hours where I was simply Emma's mother, driving toward a diner for pancakes before I became whatever I was about to become to the rest of my family. We ate breakfast at a little roadside place that was miraculously open on Christmas Day. Emma told me about the Ramirez kids, about the puzzle they'd finished at midnight, about how Mrs. Ramirez had let her stay up to watch the ball drop early because it's basically the same thing as New Year's. I listened, grateful for the ordinary rhythm of her voice, and let my phone sit face down on the table between us. It was Emma who finally noticed the television mounted above the counter. She tugged my sleeve and said, "Mom, look, it's you," with the same tone she might have used pointing out a cartoon character. I turned and there I was, replayed on a loop on the midday news, unmistakable in my gear, my voice audible over the anchor's commentary as I called out coordinates through the wind. The caption beneath read, "Hero Officer Leads Christmas Day Rescue." I felt strange watching myself like that, detached, almost the way you feel reviewing surveillance footage of someone who looks like you, but isn't quite you. Emma just grinned and said, "You look cool, Mom," which, more than anything else that day, made me laugh for the first time in over 24 hours. Back home, I would learn later the reaction had taken on a life of its own. My mother told me that the phone in their house hadn't stopped ringing since 9 that morning. Neighbors, church friends, my aunt in Ohio, People my parents hadn't spoken to in years, all calling to say they'd seen me on the news, all asking some version of the same question. Why didn't you tell us your daughter was a hero? My mother, by her own admission, had no answer for that. What could she say that they'd thrown their hero daughter's bags into the snow 12 hours earlier over a spilled glass of wine and a jealous son's wounded pride? Jason apparently tried at first to minimize it. My mother told me he'd sat on the couch with his arms crossed, muttering that I was probably just doing it for the cameras, that the timing was suspicious, that I'd always had a flair for making myself look good. But even as he said it, the phone kept ringing, and the segments kept airing. And by early afternoon, a Pentagon press briefing had specifically named my unit's actions in the mountain rescue, praising the coordination and speed that had brought 2 soldiers home alive on Christmas morning. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when a lie a family has told itself for years finally becomes impossible to maintain. My mother described it to me later as the quietest their house had been in decades. Not peaceful, but suffocating thick, with the specific horror of realizing you have deeply misjudged someone you were supposed to know better than anyone. My father didn't say much, according to my mother. He mostly sat in his recliner, staring at the muted television replaying. She assumed every word he'd said to me the night before. If you can't respect your brother in this house, then take your daughter and go. Those words must have sounded very different to him in the light of what the rest of the country now knew about the daughter he'd thrown out into the snow. By evening, my mother said even the pastor from their church had called, asking if the family wanted to be recognized during the Christmas service for having such a distinguished officer among them. She said, "My father took that call standing in the kitchen, and when he hung up, he didn't say a word. He just sat down at the table and put his head in his hands." I still hadn't called back. I was driving home with Emma, the radio playing quietly, my daughter humming along off-key to a song she barely knew, and for those few hours, I let myself have that instead. An ordinary drive, an ordinary daughter, an ordinary kind of peace my family had never once seemed to value in me. They would have to sit with what they'd done a little while longer. I wasn't ready to make it easier for them yet. 3 days after Christmas, while I was still finishing after-action reports at base and slowly working my way back through the missed calls, I could finally stomach returning. A man named Walter Hensley knocked on my parents' front door. He introduced himself as an estate and trust attorney, set down a slim leather briefcase on their kitchen table, and asked if they had a few minutes. My mother assumed at first that it had something to do with my father's aging parents. Some overlooked paperwork from years back. She had no idea it was about me. I hadn't planned for it to come out this way. Truthfully, I hadn't planned for it to come out at all. Not like this. Not with an attorney and a folder of documents laid out across the same table where I'd eaten dinner as a child. But 8 years ago, after Marcus died, and the life insurance settlement came through, I'd made a decision I never told anyone about, not even my parents, especially not my parents. I set up a trust quietly, deliberately, structured, so that certain bills got paid without anyone ever needing to know where the money came from. Walter had been managing that trust since the beginning, and per the terms, I'd set terms that included a clause requiring notification to beneficiaries in the event of my death or incapacitation or at my explicit request. He was there that day because I'd asked him to be the morning after the rescue. In a 5-minute phone call I made from the command post before I'd even changed out of my snow gear. I hadn't done it out of anger. I want to be clear about that even now. I did it because something in me had finally run out of patience for being invisible in my own family's eyes. My mother told me later, her voice still unsteady weeks afterward, that Walter opened the folder and began reading through 8 years of transactions. Calm and methodical the way attorneys do when they know the content itself will do all the emotional work for them. The homeowner's insurance on my parents' house paid annually without fail since the year after Marcus's funeral, back when my father's small business had gone under, and they'd nearly lost the place. My father's medical bills, after his heart attack 4 years ago, the ones my mother had always assumed were covered by his insurance, when in reality nearly 40% of the balance had been quietly absorbed by the trust. Private school tuition for both of Jason's children, paid every semester for the past 5 years, arranged, so the checks came from an educational fund, with no name attached that anyone recognized. And perhaps most damning of all, a personal loan Jason had taken out 3 years ago, against the promise of paying it back within a year. A loan he never repaid and never once mentioned to our parents, and one I had quietly been covering the interest on ever since, so his credit wouldn't collapse and take the rest of the family down with it. Walter read every line. My mother said she stopped breathing somewhere around the tuition payments. My father, she said, put both hands flat on the table, like he needed something solid to hold on to. Colonel Turner asked that this remain confidential. Walter told them, closing the folder. She didn't want gratitude. She wanted the people she loved to be taken care of without conditions attached. He paused before adding quieter. She was very specific about that phrase, no conditions. My mother asked him, voice barely above a whisper, why now? Why reveal it now after everything? Walter's answer, as she repeated it to me, has stayed with me since. She didn't ask me to reveal it to hurt anyone. She asked me to bring it forward because she said, and I'm quoting her directly, that she was tired of being loved conditionally, by people she had never once loved with conditions of her own. Jason, my mother said, sat frozen through the entire reading. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer his usual commentary. When Walter finally packed up his briefcase and left, Jason remained at the table long after our parents had gotten up, staring at nothing running through. I imagine every insult he'd ever thrown at me over the years, every playing soldier comment, every implication that I contributed nothing real to this family, while he sat unemployed in the house. I was quietly helping to keep afloat. I wasn't there for any of it. I heard the story secondhand, pieced together from my mother's shaking voice on the phone and Walter's brief professional summary afterward. But I could picture it easily enough: the kitchen, where I'd once believed foolishly that presence and sacrifice would eventually be enough to earn plain respect. I didn't do any of it for a reckoning. I did it because it was right at the time to protect people I loved, even when they made it difficult to love them back. But now they knew. And knowing changes things. It always does. The real conversation, the one that mattered, was still ahead of us. I agreed to see them the second week of January, once my leave was formally extended, and the mountain rescue paperwork had finally cleared my desk. I chose neutral ground, a quiet conference room at the base's family services building. Not their house, not mine, nowhere either of us could claim as home turf. I brought Emma to a friend's for the afternoon. This wasn't a conversation for an 8-year-old to sit through. My mother arrived first, her eyes red-rimmed in a way that told me she'd been crying on and off for days. My father came in behind her, older somehow than he'd looked 2 weeks earlier, his shoulders carrying a weight I didn't remember seeing on him before. Jason came last, and even before he sat down I could read the posture, arms crossed. Jaw set, a man bracing for an argument, rather than walking in ready for an honest one. My mother spoke first, the words tumbling out fast, half apology and half disbelief. She said she hadn't slept properly since Christmas. She said she kept replaying that dinner in her head, wondering how they hadn't known, how they'd let it go on as long as it had. My father said less, but what he did say landed heavier. A quiet, broken admission that he'd spent 30 years measuring my worth by a yardstick that had never once applied to me, and that the yardstick had been wrong from the beginning. I listened to both of them without interrupting. I'd had 2 weeks to prepare for this moment, and I wasn't interested in scoring points off my parents' genuine grief. But then Jason spoke, and everything in the room shifted. So what? You did all this just to make us feel guilty? His voice had that same practiced condescension I'd been hearing my whole life. Only now it sounded thinner, more desperate, like a man trying to hold on to a version of events that had already collapsed around him. 8 years of secret payments, and now suddenly it all comes out right after Dad throws you out. Convenient timing, Abby. I felt my mother flinch beside him. My father said nothing, staring down at his hands. I didn't raise my voice. I'd learned a long time ago that volume was rarely the most effective weapon in a room like this. Instead, I reached into my bag and set a thick folder on the table between us. Bank statements, insurance records, tuition receipts, loan documentation. 8 years of quiet, unglamorous proof laid out in black and white. "This isn't about guilt, Jason," I said. "This is what actually happened in case you'd rather argue with paper than with me." I slid the folder toward him, every payment dated, every bill itemized. None of it timed around Christmas. None of it timed around anything except when the bills came due. He didn't open it. He just stared at it like it might bite him. I kept going because he needed to hear all of it, not just the parts that were comfortable. I told him about the loan. His loan, the one he'd taken out 3 years earlier, promising repayment within 12 months, the one he'd never once mentioned to our parents, the one I'd been quietly covering interest on so it wouldn't ruin his credit, and by extension wouldn't become another crisis or parents had to absorb. I watched something in his face crack slightly as I said it out loud. "The specific shame of hearing your secrets recited back to you by someone you'd spent years underestimating. I did all of this," I said, "not because I wanted credit, not because I wanted anyone to owe me anything. I did it because that's what family is supposed to mean. You take care of the people you love, especially when they don't know they need it, and you don't hold it over their heads." I paused, letting that settle before I continued. "But apparently, in this family, love only flows one direction. You can mock what I do for 18 years. You can call it playing soldier. You can accuse me of abandoning my daughter for serving my country. And the moment the whole country sees me differently, suddenly, I'm the villain for not telling you I was quietly keeping this family financially afloat the entire time." My mother started crying again, softer this time, more resigned. My father finally looked up and met my eyes. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I saw something in his expression that wasn't disappointment. It looked instead like shame. Real shame. The kind that doesn't come from getting caught, but from finally understanding what you've actually done. "This is the last time," I told them, my voice steady, even as the words cost me something to say. "The trust ends today. I'm canceling the insurance payments, the tuition fund, and Jason's loan support. Not out of spite, because I need my family to build something real on your own, instead of something propped up by a daughter you were embarrassed to claim." Jason's face went pale in a way I hadn't expected. Whatever bravado he'd walked in with evaporated entirely, replaced by something closer to panic. The look of a man realizing for the first time exactly how much of his life had been quietly held together by someone he'd spent years tearing down. I stood, gathered my folder, and left the room before anyone could respond. Some conversations end better in silence than in argument. This was one of them. The weeks after the family meeting unfolded exactly the way I'd expected them to. Which is to say, painfully, and without any of the drama Jason had probably imagined I wanted. I didn't call to check on anyone. I didn't send updates. I simply lived my life, returned to my post, picked Emma up from school, and let the silence do what silence does best reveal. Exactly what had been holding a family together. Jason lost his car within 6 weeks without the quiet interest payments I'd been covering. His loan ballooned past what he could manage. And the bank came calling in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away with charm. My mother told me about it in a voice that had lost its usual defensiveness on his behalf. Not gloating, just tired like a woman, finally seeing her son clearly after years of choosing not to. He moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place he used to make jokes about. The kind of place that used to be beneath the version of himself he performed at every family dinner. He didn't call me. I didn't expect him to. Some people need to hit the floor before they understand there was ever a ceiling holding them up. My mother called often those first few months, her voice threading between apology and quiet desperation. She asked more than once if I would consider coming back, not just to visit, but to let things go back to how they were. I understood what she meant. Even if she never said it directly back to a version of family where I quietly gave, and no one quietly noticed. I told her gently but firmly that I loved her, and that love didn't mean pretending the last 18 years hadn't happened. It was my father who surprised me most. 3 months after the family meeting, he showed up unannounced at my house on a Saturday afternoon, standing on my porch, in his good coat, hands shoved deep in his pockets like he wasn't sure they belonged to him. He didn't ask to see me first. He asked if he could see Emma. I let him in. I watched from the kitchen doorway as he knelt down in my living room, at eye level with his granddaughter, and said words I never thought I'd hear from him. That he was sorry, that he'd been wrong. That the woman on television that Christmas morning was the same woman he should have been proud of every single day before that, not just the day the whole country told him to be. Emma, with the easy forgiveness of an 8-year-old, hugged him without hesitation. I watched my father cry for the first time in my adult life, his shoulders shaking silently over my daughter's small frame, and felt something in my own chest loosen that I hadn't realized I'd been holding so tightly for so long. I forgave him, not instantly, and not because his apology erased 12 years of feeling like the least important child in that house. I forgave him because carrying that particular weight forever wasn't a punishment for him. It was one for me, and I'd spent enough of my life carrying things that weren't mine to carry. But forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't require reconstruction. It doesn't mean handing someone the keys to hurt you the same way twice. I bought a house that spring, small and simple, with a yard big enough for Emma to build snowmen in next winter. I invited my parents to visit whenever they wanted, and they came carefully at first, then more naturally as the visits stopped feeling like negotiations and started feeling like what they should have been all along. My father learned to ask about my work instead of dismissing it. My mother learned to simply listen. It wasn't perfect, it never will be, but it was honest. And honest was more than I'd had in years. Jason and I never fully repaired things. Not in the way people hope for in stories like this. He reached out once months later, not quite an apology, more an acknowledgement that he'd been wrong about a lot of things. I accepted it for what it was. I didn't reopen the trust. Some doors once closed are meant to stay that way, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. The following Christmas, our tree stood in the corner of my new living room lights, catching in Emma's eyes as she hung the last ornament near the top. She turned to me at one point, thoughtful in the way children get when they're working through something bigger than they usually say out loud. "Mom," she asked, "are you still mad at Grandpa?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "No, baby, I'm not mad at him anymore." I knelt down fires beside her, adjusting an ornament she'd hung slightly crooked. But forgiving someone doesn't mean going back to a place where they can hurt you the same way again. It just means you stop letting the hurt control you. She nodded slowly, the way she does when something settles into her the right way, then turned back to the tree, humming softly to herself. Outside, snow drifted quietly past the window, the kind of soft, steady snow that doesn't threaten anything, that just makes the world feel a little more still. For the first time in longer than I could remember, our home felt entirely peacefully ours. If this story moved you, I'd love to know where it found you tonight. Leave a comment below and let me know. Stories like Abigail's remind us that quiet strength often speaks louder than any argument ever could, and that real family isn't about who raises their voice the loudest, but who shows up again and again without needing to be asked. We share stories like this every single day. So, if it touched something in you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. Thank you for walking this journey with us. I'll see you in the next. I am Claire, 33 years old, and after my husband threw me out into the pouring rain without a single cent, I thought my life was completely over. When I tried to use an old card my father had left me, the bank manager turned pale, slung open his door, and shouted for everyone to move aside. I was in complete shock when I discovered that my late father had secretly left me an empire, and my ex-husband had unknowingly borrowed millions from a firm I now owned. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. It was a Tuesday evening, and the rain in our suburban Connecticut neighborhood was coming down in relentless sheets. Cold water soaked straight through my coat, clinging to my skin, As I walked up the paved walkway of the house I had called home for 4 years, I was utterly exhausted. As a UX researcher for an educational technology company, I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift analyzing user data, desperately trying to keep my head above water at work while my personal life crumbled. All I wanted was to step inside, take a hot shower, and crash onto the couch. I reached out my shivering hand and typed my usual 6-digit PIN into the sleek smart lock on the front door. The keypad chimed 3 times with a sharp, harsh red flash. Access denied. I frowned, thinking my fingers were just too wet. So, I wiped the glass screen with my sleeve and carefully punched in the numbers again. Access denied. The lock buzzed mechanically, rejecting me a second time. My heart did a sudden, uncomfortable flip in my chest. Before I could even pull my phone out to check if the electronic system was glitching, the heavy oak door swung open from the inside. Standing in the warm golden glow of the foyer was my 35-year-old husband, Harrison. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy sweater and slacks, holding a glass of scotch in his right hand. But he was not alone. Flanking him on his left, wearing an oversized silk robe that I recognized instantly because it belonged to me, was Kendall. At 28, Kendall was a commercial real estate broker, a woman Harrison had introduced to me 6 months ago as a prospective client for his venture capital firm. Harrison did not smile, nor did he look surprised to see me shivering under the dark sky. He simply took a slow sip of his drink and looked down at me as if I were a stray dog on his porch. I stood there, water dripping from my hair onto my face, my eyes darting from his cold face to Kendall, who was leaning casually against the doorframe with a smug, victorious smirk. "What is going on, Harrison?" I asked, my voice trembling from the freezing cold and a sudden wave of nausea. "Why is my code not working? And why is Kendall wearing my robe?" Harrison did not answer me right away. Instead, he casually pointed his glass toward the manicured front lawn. I turned my head following his gesture and felt my breath catch in my throat. Sitting right there in the muddy grass, completely exposed to the torrential downpour, were 3 large black garbage bags. One of them had ripped open at the seam, and I could see my clothes, my books, and the framed photograph of my late father soaking in the mud. Harrison stepped forward onto the covered porch, pulling a thick stack of papers from his back pocket. Without a word of explanation, he tossed the documents directly at my feet. The pages scattered across the wet concrete, instantly getting soaked. "Pack your things and get off my property," Harrison said, his voice flat, devoid of a single drop of emotion. "We are done, Claire. Those are your divorce papers." I stared at the papers on the ground, then looked up at him in sheer disbelief. "Are you insane?" I yelled over the sound of the falling rain. "You cannot just throw me out of my own house. We bought this place together. I paid for half of the down payment with my savings. My name is on the mortgage." Harrison let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the sound of the thunder. "Your name?" he sneered, taking a step closer to the edge of the porch while Kendall crossed her arms, watching the spectacle with delight. "Do not make me laugh, Claire. You contribute a pathetic UX researcher's salary. You make peanuts compared to what it takes to maintain a lifestyle in this zip code. You think your little contribution gives you rights here." He leaned in, his eyes narrowing with pure malice. "Let me educate you on how the real world works. 3 months ago, I restructured the ownership. I leveraged this house as collateral against a credit line for my firm. I own the debt, which means I own the equity. You have no standing here. You are a financial ghost in this house, Claire. You brought nothing into this marriage, and you are leaving with nothing." The sheer arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. For 3 years, I had watched him play high-stakes games with other people's money, but I never imagined he would use his corporate maneuvers to strip me of my own home. I looked at Kendall, who let out a soft giggle, adjusting the belt of my robe. "High is right," Claire Kendall added, her tone dripping with condescension. "Harrison needs a real partner, someone who understands high finance and real estate, not a glorified paper pusher who cries every time work gets stressful. You should really just take your bags and leave before you embarrass yourself any further." Something inside me snapped. The years of suppressing my anger, of trying to be the supportive, quiet wife, while Harrison chased his corporate ambitions, evaporated in an instant. I stepped up onto the porch, intending to push past him to grab my purse, my keys, and demand to speak to a lawyer right from the kitchen phone. "I am not going anywhere," I said firmly, my voice shaking with rage as I tried to step around Harrison. "This is my legal residence, and you cannot lock me out without a court order." Harrison did not even bother to block my path with his body. He simply raised his arm, pointed his finger toward the street, and smirked. "Go ahead, try it," he said calmly. Just then, bright red and blue lights illuminated the rain-drenched street. The low rumble of an engine filled the air as two police cruisers pulled up along the curb, their emergency lights flashing against the wet trees. I froze on the porch steps, staring at the flashing lights in utter confusion. Harrison took a slow sip of his scotch and smiled, a cold, calculated look that chilled me more than the freezing rain. "I called the precinct 20 minutes ago," Harrison whispered, leaning down so only I could hear him over the storm. "I told them a disgruntled, unstable former employee was trying to break into my private residence and harass my fiancé. If you take one more step toward this door, Claire, I will have them arrest you for hostile trespassing. Let us see how your little tech job handles a mugshot on your record." The heavy boots of the two police officers sloshed against the wet pavement as they approached the porch. One officer rested his hand casually on his utility belt, while the other stepped between Harrison and me. They did not look at the garbage bags on the lawn or my soaking wet clothes. They only looked at Harrison, who instantly transformed his demeanor from a mocking predator to a concerned, exhausted homeowner. "Officer, thank you for arriving so quickly," Harrison said smoothly. His voice was practically dripping with manufactured relief. "My ex-wife is having a difficult time accepting the separation boundaries. I just need her escorted off the premises so my fiancé and I can have a peaceful evening." I tried to speak, but the cold rain and the sheer shock of his lies made my jaw tremble. "I live here," I managed to say, pointing a shaking finger at the front door. "My name is on the mortgage. He literally locked me out 20 minutes ago." The older officer turned to me, his expression entirely neutral. "Ma, if there is a domestic dispute over property ownership, that is a civil matter for the family courts. Right now, the resident inside has asked you to leave. If you refuse, we will have to detain you for trespassing and disturbing the peace." I looked at the officers, then back at Harrison. Kendall was peeking out from behind his shoulder, holding a manicured hand over her mouth to hide her grin. The police were not going to help me. The law in this exact moment was firmly on the side of the man standing inside the warm, dry house. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat, nodded silently, and stepped backward off the porch. I walked into the muddy grass and grabbed the torn plastic garbage bags. The officers watched me drag my ruined belongings down the driveway and out of the neighborhood, cooled a sack. I hauled the heavy soaking bags for 3 blocks until I reached a small, dimly lit bus stop shelter. The plastic awning barely kept the wind out, but it offered a temporary shield from the torrential downpour. I dropped the bags onto the concrete and leaned against the cold glass of the shelter. My teeth chattered violently. I needed to get out of the cold. I needed a hot shower and a bed. And then I would hire the most aggressive divorce attorney in the state first thing in the morning. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The screen was smeared with rain, but I managed to open my banking app. Harrison and I shared a joint savings account. We had been pooling our money for years, ostensibly for a larger property or an emergency fund. I knew exactly how much was in there. $62,000. I planned to transfer $5,000 to my personal checking account to cover a decent hotel for the week and a retainer for a lawyer. The app loaded. The screen flashed white, then blue, displaying my dashboard. I blinked, wiping the rainwater from my eyes, sure that the screen was glitching due to the storm. Available balance $0. My heart slammed against my ribs. I frantically tapped on the transaction history. The ledger loaded, showing a single massive transfer executed exactly 4 hours ago. Harrison had authorized a wire transfer of the entire $62,000 into a private external account. A wave of pure panic washed over me. I checked my personal checking account. It showed a balance of $14 because my paycheck was directly deposited into our joint account. I had virtually no cash to my name. I felt the air leave my lungs as the brutal reality of state financial law crashed down on me. In our state, any individual named on a joint bank account has the legal right to withdraw the entire balance without the consent or knowledge of the other party. It was a vicious, completely legal maneuver, and Harrison had timed it perfectly. He had wiped out my entire life savings just hours before serving me the divorce papers. My phone buzzed in my freezing hand, startling me. A new text message appeared on the screen. It was an unknown number, but the attached image loaded instantly. It was a photograph of Kendall's hand resting on the steering wheel of Harrison's luxury SUV. On her ring finger sat a massive, ostentatiously large diamond ring. It caught the light, perfectly sparkling, with a price tag that made my stomach churn. Below the image was a text. Harrison's startup money finally bought me the life I deserve. Have a nice night in the rain, sweetie. I stared at the glowing screen. Startup money. Harrison had not used his firm's capital. He had taken my savings, the money I had earned working endless 12-hour shifts, analyzing data to buy his mistress a diamond ring. He had stolen my past to fund her future. I shoved the phone into my pocket, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. I dragged my garbage bags to where I had parked my car earlier that morning. My 10-year-old Honda Civic sat under a street lamp, looking battered and incredibly small against the backdrop of the wealthy neighborhood. I shoved the bags into the trunk, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. My hands shook violently as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. I turned the heater on full blast, but it only blew lukewarm air. I put the car in drive and headed toward the highway, searching for the cheapest roadside motel I could find. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the flickering neon parking lot of a budget motel. The lobby smelled heavily of bleach and stale cigarette smoke. I stood at the front desk, leaving puddles of rainwater on the linoleum floor, and pulled out my primary credit card. I need a room for the night, I told the night clerk, pushing my wet hair out of my face. He took the card, ran it through the machine, and frowned. The machine beeped aggressively. Declined, he said in a bored tone, handing the card back. That is impossible, I replied, my voice rising in panic. Try it again, please. He swiped it a second time. The same harsh beep echoed in the quiet lobby, declined again. Ma'am, do you have another card or cash? I fumbled through my wallet, pulling out my secondary credit card. He swiped it, declined. I pulled out a third card, a backup I kept for emergencies, declined. I stepped away from the counter, my face burning with humiliation, and dialed the customer service number on the back of the primary card. An automated voice answered cheerfully, informing me that my account had been closed by the primary account holder. Harrison was the primary account holder on all our credit lines. I was only an authorized user. He had called the credit card companies and canceled every single one of my supplementary cards. He had meticulously cut off every avenue of financial survival, trapping me in an invisible cage of poverty. I walked out of the motel lobby, the harsh neon lights reflecting in the puddles around my worn-out shoes. I got back into my Civic and sat behind the steering wheel. I had $14 to my name. I had no access to credit. I had no savings. I reached into the back seat, pulling a damp sweater from one of the ripped garbage bags, and wrapped it around my shivering shoulders. I reclined the driver's seat, as far back as it would go. The rain continued to hammer against the windshield, sounding like a steady drumbeat of defeat. I curled into a tight ball in the freezing cabin of my 10-year-old sedan. The cold seeped into my bones, but the physical chill was nothing compared to the absolute, terrifying realization that the man I had loved for years had meticulously engineered my total destruction. I woke up the next morning to the harsh glare of the early sun piercing through the rain-streaked windshield of my Honda Civic. Every muscle in my body locked in a stiff, unnatural position from sleeping curled around the steering wheel. The air inside the cabin was freezing thick with the damp condensation of my own breath. I sat up slowly, my head pounding with a dull, relentless ache that radiated down my neck. I had survived the night, but survival was not going to pay for a lawyer, a hot meal, or a hotel room. I needed to go to work. I needed to log into the corporate server, keep my job, and figure out a strategic plan to fight back. But my primary work laptop was currently sitting in a garbage bag on the front lawn of the house I used to own, ruined by the storm. Then I remembered a small sliver of luck. Last Sunday, I had visited Harrison's younger sister, Stella, to help her set up a new smart home security system. I had brought my backup work laptop with me and absent-mindedly left it on her kitchen island. It was my only lifeline to my job, my only remaining connection to a stable paycheck. I forced my numb fingers to turn the ignition key. The engine coughed twice before sputtering to life, the heater still blowing useless lukewarm air. I pulled out of the dingy motel parking lot and navigated the heavy morning traffic toward the affluent gated community where Stella lived. At 30 years old, Stella had always mirrored her brother's profound arrogance. She lived in a sprawling modern farmhouse, funded entirely by her husband Jamal. Jamal was a 32-year-old independent auditor, a brilliant and quiet African-American man who always seemed entirely out of place among Harrison's loud, boastful, and incredibly toxic family. Jamal was the only one who ever treated me with genuine respect, often offering a sympathetic smile when Stella made her cutting remarks at holiday dinners. I parked my battered sedan at the end of Stella's pristine paverstone driveway. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was damp and tangled, my eyes bloodshot, and my clothes deeply wrinkled from sleeping in them. I looked exactly like the broken woman Harrison wanted me to be. I took a deep breath, gathered whatever shred of dignity I had left, and walked up to the heavy mahogany front door. I rang the doorbell twice, waiting in the crisp morning air. The door swung open. Stella stood there in expensive designer yoga pants, holding a steaming mug of artisanal coffee. She did not look surprised to see my disheveled, freezing state. In fact, a cruel, knowing smile spread across her perfectly made-up face. Harrison had clearly already called her to gloat about the lockout. "I am just here for my backup laptop," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible, refusing to let her see me shiver. "I left it on your kitchen counter last week. I need it for work. Please just hand it to me and I will leave your property." Stella took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, leaning her shoulder against the doorframe to physically block the entrance. Her eyes ran over my rumpled clothes and muddy shoes with absolute disgust. "You really have no shame, Claire," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom, "showing up here looking like a homeless person. Harrison told me you caused a massive scene last night in front of the neighbors. Honestly, you should be entirely embarrassed by your behavior." I stared at her, my hands balling into tight fists at my sides. "He locked me out of my own house and stole my entire life savings. Stella, he committed financial abuse." "Oh, please." Stella laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed in the quiet suburban street. "He took back what rightfully belonged to him. You were just a placeholder, Claire. A boring, low-earning placeholder. Harrison is building an empire. He needs a woman who matches his ambition, not a pathetic researcher who cannot even give him children." The comment about my infertility felt like a physical strike to the chest, stealing the air from my lungs. Stella knew exactly how many grueling, painful medical treatments I had endured trying to build a family with her brother. She knew how thoroughly the clinical failures had broken my heart. Yet, she wielded that trauma like a weapon. "Kendall is a powerhouse," Stella continued, clearly relishing the pain flashing across my face. "She just closed a $5 million commercial real estate deal yesterday." $5 million, Claire. That is what a real partner looks like. She is a winner. You are just dead weight holding my brother back." My vision blurred with a volatile mix of exhaustion and absolute fury. "Dead weight." I repeated, my voice rising above a whisper. "I spent my entire 20s carrying this family when your mother got sick with early onset dementia. Where were you? You were backpacking through Europe on Harrison's dime. Where was Harrison? He was working late to build his so-called empire. I was the one changing her clothes. I was the one managing her complex medications, taking her to every single doctor's appointment and holding her hand while she forgot her own name. I sacrificed my youth, my career growth, and my peace of mind to care for your mother, while you all looked the other way." Stella rolled her eyes, completely unmoved by the undeniable truth. "That was your basic duty as a wife," she scoffed. "You lived under our family's roof. You ate our food. You enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle my brother provided. Caring for our mother was the bare minimum you could do to pay your rent. Harrison owes you absolutely nothing for that. In fact, you owe him for putting up with your mediocrity for this long. I stood frozen on the pristine welcome mat. The sheer rewrite of history, the utter lack of humanity in her words, left me entirely speechless. They had eagerly consumed my time, my savings, and my youth. And now they were brazenly rewriting the narrative to make me the villain. There was no point in arguing with someone who viewed basic human compassion as a financial transaction. "Just give me my laptop," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, flat tone. "I am not leaving this porch without it." "You can buy a new one with your non-existent savings," Stella spat. "Have a terrible life, Claire." She grabbed the heavy brass handle and moved to violently slam the mahogany door right in my face. But before the heavy wood could click into the frame, a large, strong hand reached out from the shadows of the foyer and caught the edge of the door, stopping it dead with a loud thud. Stella gasped and stepped back in shock. Jamal stepped into the doorway, moving completely in front of his wife. He was already dressed in a sharp gray suit for his accounting firm, but his tie was loosened and his face was unusually pale. Jamal looked down at me, and I immediately saw it in his eyes. He was not looking at me with the usual quiet pity he displayed at family dinners. He was looking at me with intense, unspoken anxiety. Jamal stepped firmly past his wife, ignoring her loud gasp of indignation. "What on earth are you doing?" Stella shrieked, reaching out to grab the sleeve of his tailored suit jacket. Jamal did not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on mine, his expression a tight mask of absolute urgency. In his left hand, he held my black nylon laptop bag. He extended it toward me. I reached out with trembling fingers to take the handle. As my skin brushed against his, I felt something else. Jamal flipped his wrist slightly, pressing a tightly wadded, crumpled piece of paper directly into the center of my palm. He squeezed my hand shut around it, a silent but desperate command to keep it hidden from his wife. Stella grabbed his shoulder, her sharp manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric of his suit. "Get away from her, Jamal," she yelled, her face twisting with ugly rage. I told her to get off our property. Jamal allowed his wife to pull him backward, but as he retreated into the foyer, he leaned forward just an inch. "He did not just take the house," Jamal whispered rapidly, his deep voice barely carrying over the sound of the morning wind. "Look at the corporate filings from last month." Before I could even process his words or ask a single question, Stella aggressively yanked him back inside. She grabbed the heavy brass handle and slammed the mahogany door shut with a deafening crack. The deadbolt slid into place with a sharp, heavy click, locking me out once again. I stood frozen on the porch for a long moment, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I looked down at my closed fist. My knuckles were entirely white. Whatever Jamal had just given me, it was dangerous enough that he had to sneak it past his own wife. I turned around and sprinted down the paver-stone driveway, desperate to get back to the isolated safety of my car. I threw the heavy laptop bag onto the passenger seat of my 10-year-old Honda Civic and slammed the driver's side door shut. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely peel my fingers open. I placed the crumpled ball of paper on the steering wheel and began to carefully smooth out the deep creases. The paper was slightly damp from my sweaty palm, but the black ink was perfectly legible. It was a printed spreadsheet, heavily cropped, and clearly printed in a rush from a secure accounting database. At the very top, the header read Commercial Debt Obligation and Collateral Summary. I scanned the columns, my eyes darting across the rows of complex financial jargon until they locked onto a specific string of numbers. It was the exact address of the suburban home I had bought with Harrison. I traced my finger across the row. The document outlined a massive high-interest business loan issued exactly 30 days ago. The borrower was Harrison's venture capital firm. The collateral securing the debt was my primary residence, and the total loan amount was a staggering $2 million. The air vanished from the small cabin of my car. A cold, suffocating panic gripped my chest. $2 million. Harrison had not just restructured the ownership of our home to kick me out. He had secretly leveraged the entire property to secure an enormous injection of cash for his failing startup. but that was legally impossible. My name was still on the original deed and the mortgage. No legitimate bank would ever approve a collateral lien of that magnitude without the explicit notarized signature of both homeowners unless he forged it. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The smug look on Harrison's face the night before suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. He had drained our joint savings to fund his immediate lifestyle. But the real money, the millions he needed to keep his arrogant facade alive, was tied directly to this fraudulent loan. If his venture capital firm defaulted on those payments, the bank would immediately seize the house. He had literally gambled my only asset on his own reckless ego. Jamal was an auditor. He had access to the raw financial data of Harrison's firm, and he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy my ex-husband. If I could get to the local bank branch and contest the lien, if I could prove to the loan officers that I never signed the collateral agreement, the bank would instantly freeze Harrison's accounts, pending a federal fraud investigation. I shoved the crumpled paper deep into the front pocket of my damp jeans. I grabbed my car keys, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The crushing despair from the night before evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp, blinding fury. I thrust the key into the ignition and twisted it hard. The engine roared to life. I reached for the gear shift to throw the car into drive. Suddenly, a massive, violent jolt rocked the entire vehicle. The impact was so severe, my head snapped backward, hitting the headrest. A loud metallic crunch echoed through the quiet suburban street, followed by the high-pitched whine of industrial hydraulics. I gasped, my hands flying up to brace myself against the steering wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror, my eyes widening in pure horror. A massive yellow tow truck had silently backed down the cul-de-sac and positioned itself directly behind my Civic. The driver, a burly man in a neon safety vest, was standing at the rear of my vehicle, operating a control panel. Thick metal arms had already clamped tightly around my rear tires, hoisting the back of my car 2 feet into the air. "Hey!" I screamed, throwing the car door open and stumbling out into the street. "What are you doing?" "Put my car down. You cannot tow this. I am parked legally." The driver did not even flinch. He casually pulled a thick clipboard from his heavy jacket and walked toward me, his expression completely bored. "Are you Claire?" he asked, glancing down at a sheet of paper. "Yes," I yelled, waving my arms frantically. "Put the car down right now. I have to go to the bank." "This is a massive mistake." "No mistake, lady," the driver said flatly, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "This is a court-ordered repossession. Your lender issued the recovery order yesterday afternoon. The account is completely delinquent." "Delinquent?" I repeated, shaking my head in total confusion. "That is impossible. The payments on this car are automatically deducted from my checking account every single month." "I have never missed a payment in my life," the driver sighed, flipping to the second page of his documents. "I do not know what to tell you. The primary co-signer on the auto loan contacted the lender 3 months ago, canceled the automatic payments, and explicitly refused to cover the balance. The account is 90 days past due. The lender called the entire note. The car belongs to the bank now." My vision swam as the brutal reality of the trap closed around me. The primary co-signer, Harrison. He had co-signed the auto loan 5 years ago, when my credit was too new to get a decent interest rate. He had deliberately logged into the portal, canceled the auto draft, and let the account default all while I blissfully assumed the payments were clearing. He had orchestrated this months in advance. He wanted me completely immobilized. He wanted me trapped peniles and entirely dependent on his non-existent mercy. "Please," I begged, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a desperate, humiliating panic. "You cannot take my car. Everything I have left in the world is in the trunk. My clothes, my father's picture, everything. Just give me 24 hours. The driver shook his head, completely unmoved by my desperation. "Take your personal belongings out of the cabin, lady. You have exactly 60 seconds before I drive away with this vehicle. If you interfere, I am legally required to call the police. And given what I just heard, I do not think you want the cops showing up again." I stared at him, completely defeated. I turned round and reached into the passenger seat, grabbing my laptop bag. That was all I could carry. The trunk was locked, and the hydraulic lift angle made it impossible to open safely. My clothes, my shoes, the last remaining memories of my childhood, were entirely trapped inside a vehicle I no longer owned. I stood on the cold pavement, clutching the laptop bag to my chest, and watched in utter silence as the tow truck pulled away. The flashing Yeso lights disappeared around the corner of the affluent neighborhood, taking away my last shred of independence. I was entirely alone, standing on the side of a road 3 miles away from the commercial district, with $0 to my name and a forged $2 million loan statement burning a hole in my pocket. I took my first step forward away from the empty curb, the cold rain instantly soaking through the thin canvas of my ruined sneakers. I had 3 miles of winding suburban roads between me and the nearest commercial bank branch. I gripped my laptop bag tightly against my chest to shield it from the relentless downpour. Every step sent a sharp jolt of pain up my calves, my feet slipping inside waterlogged shoes. Expensive luxury cars sped past me on the slick asphalt, their heavy tires spraying freezing sheets of muddy water against my bare legs. Not a single driver slowed down in this wealthy zip code. A woman walking in the rain without an umbrella was not considered a neighbor in distress. She was simply an eyes sore. I kept my head down, forcing my frozen legs to keep moving forward. The physical agony was intense, but the burning rage in my chest kept me entirely warm. I touched the outside of my damp pocket, feeling the outline of the crumpled corporate loan statement Jamal had secretly given me. Harrison thought he had completely immobilized me. He thought destroying my credit, stealing my savings, and taking my car would force me to crawl back to him and beg for his mercy. He vastly underestimated my endurance. I walked for over an hour, my breathing turning into heavy gasps. By the time the sprawling glass and steel facade of the commercial bank finally came into view, I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, immediately bringing a thick trail of muddy water onto the pristine marble floor of the lobby. The aggressive air conditioning blasted against my soaked clothes, making my teeth chatter violently. The bank was mostly empty at this hour, save for a few wealthy clients sipping complimentary espresso on plush leather couches. They all turned to stare at me with undisguised disgust. I ignored them completely. I marched straight past the velvet security ropes and approached the desk of a junior teller. She was a young woman with a perfectly structured blowout and a highly condescending smile, typing leisurely on a mechanical keyboard. I did not wait for her to greet me. I dropped my heavy laptop bag onto the floor, reached into my pocket, and slapped the damp, crumpled commercial loan statement directly onto her immaculate glass counter. I need to pull the complete transaction history on this property immediately, I demanded, my voice, but entirely steady. My name is Claire, and I am the primary co-owner of the residential collateral listed on that sheet. The signature authorizing this $2 million loan is a complete forgery. I need you to freeze the dispersal accounts and escalate this to your fraud department right now. The junior teller blinked clearly, taken aback by my authoritative tone. She leaned back in her plush ergonomic chair, her eyes scanning my dripping hair, my wrinkled clothes, and the growing puddle of dirty rainwater forming around my ruined shoes. Her condescending smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer unprofessional disdain. She used a single manicured fingernail to slide the damp paper closer to her keyboard. "Ma'am," she said, dragging out the word with deliberate slowness, "you cannot just walk in here off the street and demand we freeze corporate accounts. Let me see your identification." I pulled my damp driver license from my wallet and handed it to her. She snatched it from my fingers, typed my information into her terminal, and stared at the glowing monitor. A moment later, she let out a sharp, mocking sigh. "Well, Claire," she said, emphasizing my first name with deep disrespect, "I cannot pull any transaction history for you, because you do not have authorization on this specific corporate account, and frankly, looking at your personal financial profile, I am amazed you even have the nerve to walk into this branch today." "What are you talking about?" I snapped, gripping the edge of the glass counter to steady my shaking hands. "My name is on the original deed to that house. Your name is also on 7 heavily defaulted credit lines." She shot back, turning her monitor slightly, so I could see the glaring red alerts covering my profile. Your credit score is practically non-existent. It is currently sitting at an abysmal 410. You have maxed out credit cards, multiple shadow accounts in severe delinquency, and a vehicle repossession order that officially executed this morning. You are a massive financial liability. We would not even approve you for a $50 overdraft, let alone grant you access to a multi-million-dollar corporate ledger. I stared at the screen, my heart dropping entirely into my stomach. Harrison had not just canceled my supplementary cards. Over the last 2 years, he had secretly opened multiple shadow credit cards using my social security number. He had maxed them out to silently fund his lavish lifestyle and deliberately let them default, utterly destroying my financial identity without my knowledge. He had built a flawless, invisible cage around me. You do not understand. I pleaded, desperation, finally creeping into my voice. Those accounts are entirely fraudulent. My ex-husband opened them without my consent. You have to look at the collateral agreement on that commercial loan. He forged my signature to leverage my house. If you do not flag this right now, he is going to embezzle those funds. The teller rolled her eyes completely, losing her patience with me. She grabbed my damp driver license and tossed it carelessly back across the counter. It slid off the slit glass and landed on the wet floor. I understand perfectly, she sneered, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the bank manager standing across the lobby. You are a delinquent debtor trying to blame your ex-husband for your own terrible financial choices. I am not going to entertain this ridiculous conspiracy theory, and I am certainly not going to let you drip mud all over my station any longer. She reached out and firmly pressed a red button on her desk phone. Security. We need assistance at Station 4, she announced over the intercom. We have a loitering vagrant who is refusing to leave the premises. Please escort her out immediately. I stood frozen, the heavy weight of absolute defeat crashing down on me. I had nothing left. No money, no car, no home, and now no identity. 2 large security guards in dark suits began walking briskly toward me from the front entrance. I bent down to pick up my driver license from the dirty floor. As my fingers brushed against my leather wallet, they grazed a small, hidden zipper compartment tucked deep inside the billfold. My breath caught in my throat. I stopped moving entirely. 5 years ago, just days before he passed away from a sudden heart attack, my father Thomas had handed me a small sealed envelope. He told me to put it in my wallet and never open it unless I had absolutely nowhere else to turn. I had completely forgotten it existed until this exact moment. The security guards were 10 feet away. Mom, you need to step away from the counter and come with us. The taller guard ordered, reaching out to grab my arm. I ignored him. My fingers dug into the hidden zipper. I ripped it open and pulled out the contents. It was not a piece of paper or a check. It was a solid, heavy matte black metal card. It had no bank logo, no phone number, and no visible account details. The only marking was a faint, deeply embossed silver insignia in the center and a thick magnetic strip on the back. I stood up straight, brushing the guard's hand away with a sudden, icy confidence. I looked the junior teller dead in the eye and slammed the heavy black metal card onto the glass counter. The thick metal hit the glass with a loud, authoritative crack that echoed across the entire silent bank floor. Run the card, I commanded. The junior teller stared at the heavy piece of metal resting on her pristine glass counter. She blinked slowly, entirely, unfazed by my sudden burst of authority. Instead of picking it up to swipe it through her terminal, she let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. She picked up the black card using only her thumb and index finger, holding it up to the fluorescent lights, as if it were a dirty, disease-ridden napkin. What exactly is this supposed to be? She asked, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. There is no microchip. There is no bank logo. The magnetic strip on the back is completely worn down. Are you trying to hand me a novelty gift card, Claire? Do you really think a fake piece of metal is going to suddenly wipe away your massive debt and fix your pathetic credit score? The 2 security guards had now reached my side. The taller one clamped his heavy hand down on my left shoulder, his grip tightening painfully through my soaked coat. That is enough of a scene for today, Ma, and the guard said gruffly, you are coming with us right now. We can do this the easy way, or we can call the local police to handle your trespassing charge. I tried to jerk my shoulder away, but his grip was like a vice. I kept my eyes locked on the teller, refusing to let her see my fear. I said, "Run the card," I repeated, my voice rising in volume, echoing across the quiet marble-lined lobby. The teller rolled her eyes, dropping all pretense of professional courtesy. "I am not running a fake piece of metal through my secure terminal just to humor a delusional debtor," she snapped. "In fact, since you are attempting to present fraudulent financial instruments to a federally insured institution, it is banking policy to confiscate and destroy the counterfeit item." She opened the top drawer of her desk and pulled out a long, heavy pair of stainless steel scissors. She positioned the blades directly over the center of the black metal card, preparing to cut it straight in half. I panicked, lunging forward to grab it, but the security guard yanked me back so hard. My ribs slammed into his forearm. My father had given me that card on his deathbed. It was the only thing I had left of him, the last physical connection to the man who had raised me. "Wait," I yelled, struggling against the heavy guard. "Do not touch that. Give it back to me." The teller ignored me completely, aligning the sharp metal blades over the faint silver insignia, applying intense pressure to snap the metal. At that exact moment, the heavy wooden doors of the executive offices swung open. Mr. Mitchell, the 50-year-old stoic branch manager, stepped out onto the lobby floor. He was a man who exuded quiet absolute power, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, holding a leather-bound tablet. I was deep in conversation with a wealthy local real estate developer, guiding him toward the main exit. As Mitchell walked past the teller station, the overhead fluorescent lights caught the metallic surface of the black card just as the teller prepared to destroy it. The faint, deeply embossed silver insignia flashed brightly in the light. Mitchell stopped dead in his tracks. He did not just pause. His entire body physically froze, as if someone had injected ice water directly into his veins. The expensive leather-bound tablet slipped from his fingers, hitting the marble floor with a loud, echoing smack. The wealthy developer beside him frowned, asking if he was all right. But Mitchell did not even hear him. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly ash color. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. "What on earth are you doing?" Mitchell roared his deep voice, shattering the quiet atmosphere of the entire bank. He lunged forward with a speed that entirely defied his age. He reached across the glass counter and violently slapped the stainless steel scissors right out of the junior teller's hand. The heavy scissors flew through the air and crashed against the back wall, narrowly missing an expensive glass partition. The teller shrieked, jumping back in her ergonomic chair. "Mr. Mitchell?" she stammered, her face flushed with extreme shock and confusion. "I was just confiscating a fake card from this vagrant. She is severely delinquent, and she is causing a massive disturbance on the floor." Mitchell did not even look at her. He leaned over the counter, staring at the black metal card as if it were a live explosive. He carefully picked it up by the edges, his hands shaking so violently, the metal rattled against the glass surface. He brought it inches from his face, tracing the faint silver insignia with a trembling thumb. He spun around to face the teller, his eyes blazing with a fury so intense it made the young woman shrink back into her chair. "Mom, quickly, look at this," Mitchell shouted, his voice cracking with absolute panic as he shoved the card toward her face. "Do you have any idea what you just tried to destroy? Do you have any concept of whose insignia this is?" The teller shook her head, tears of humiliation welling up in her eyes. "I just assumed it was a novelty card, sir. Her credit score is in the 400s. Mitchell slammed his fist against the desk, silencing her instantly. "You are fired," he stated, his voice dropping to a deadly absolute whisper. "Pack up your personal belongings immediately. You are permanently terminated from this institution, and I will personally ensure you never work in the financial sector again. Now get out of my sight." The teller burst into loud sobs, grabbing her purse and sprinting away from the desk in pure shame. The two security guards instantly let go of my arms, taking several nervous steps backward. The entire bank floor had fallen completely silent. The wealthy clients on the plush leather couches stopped drinking their espresso, staring at the scene in absolute shock. Mitchell took a deep, shuddering breath, trying desperately to regain his professional composure. He turned to me. The absolute power and authority he had just displayed vanished instantly, replaced by a posture of deep, undeniable reverence. He adjusted his suit jacket, stepped around the glass counter, and bowed his head slightly toward me. Emma, I sincerely apologize for the inexcusable behavior of my former staff, Mitchell said, his voice trembling with deep respect. We had no idea you were coming today. Please forgive this catastrophic breach of protocol. I stood there still dripping wet from the rain, my ruined shoes pooling muddy water on the expensive marble floor. I was utterly bewildered. 5 minutes ago, I was a loitering vagrant about to be thrown into the freezing street. Now the most powerful man in the building was bowing to me. Do you know what this card is? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mitchell nodded slowly, holding the heavy black metal with the utmost care. I do, Ma. I have worked in upper-tier banking for 30 years, and I have only ever seen one of these in person. It is a master ledger key. The security protocols for this account supersede every single rule in this branch. He gestured toward the back of the lobby with an open, inviting hand. Please come with me, he urged softly. We cannot discuss this on the public floor. He did not ask for my identification. He did not ask for my signature or mention my ruined credit score. He completely bypassed every security protocol, leading me past the velvet ropes and the staring clients. We walked down a long, quiet corridor lined with expensive artwork until we reached a set of heavy steel elevator doors. Mitchell pulled a physical key from his pocket, inserted it into a hidden panel on the wall, and turned it. The door slid open, revealing a private elevator car lined with dark mahogany and brushed steel. I stepped inside, clutching my damp laptop bag tightly to my chest. Mitchell followed me, pressing a single button marked with a negative symbol. We were not going to the executive suite on the upper floors. We were descending deep underground, heading straight down into the subterranean VIP vault. The elevator descended in absolute silence, the gentle hum of the mechanics, the only sound in the small mahogany cabin. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped out into a sprawling subterranean room, made entirely of polished concrete and reinforced glass. There were no teller windows here, only a massive central console surrounded by heavy steel monitors. Mitchell walked briskly to the console and gestured for me to sit in a plush leather chair. He took the black metal card from his pocket with extreme care and slid it into a specialized biometric scanner. The heavy steel monitors instantly flashed a brilliant emerald green. A complex web of financial data flooded the screens, scrolling faster than my eyes could follow. Mitchell turned to me, his posture stiff and formal, addressing me with absolute reverence. Welcome back, Miss Claire, he said softly. The trust has been awaiting your arrival for 5 years. I shook my head in utter confusion, shivering slightly in my damp clothes. Trust, I repeated. My father was a quiet middle-class hardware supplier. He ran a small shop in Fairfield. He did not have a trust. Mitchell offered a gentle, knowing smile. Thomas was a brilliant man who valued his privacy above all else. The hardware store was merely a quiet hobby, a front to keep his family shielded from the vicious nature of his true work. Your father was the silent architect of one of the most ruthless corporate debt acquisition firms on the East Coast. He engineered hostile takeovers, bought distressed assets, and liquidated failing companies. He hid his true wealth behind a meticulously structured blind trust to protect you from the dangerous people he dealt with. Mitchell tapped the glass screen, bringing up a centralized dashboard. The numbers on the screen were so large they looked completely unreal. The trust contains over $80 million in liquid assets, along with a massive portfolio of commercial real estate, Mitchell explained, pointing to the glowing figures. Because it is an irrevocable blind trust established long before your marriage, every single penny is legally shielded from any marital property claims. Your husband has zero claim to this money. I sat absolutely frozen in the plush leather chair. $80 million. Hours ago, I had only $14 to my name and was forced to sleep in my freezing car. Now, I easily possessed more than enough liquid capital to buy Harrison's entire firm 10 times over. But the shock of the inheritance was nothing compared to what Mitchell showed me next. He pulled up a specific subsidiary ledger, his expression turning grim. "Miss Claire, I need you to look at this," he said, enlarging a document on the central monitor. I traced the digital ledger with my index finger, completely unable to breathe. One of the subsidiary, corporate lenders owned entirely by my father's secretive trust was the exact same firm that had quietly issued Harrison's fraudulent $2 million business loan against my residential property. I stared at the glowing green text on the monitor, the reality of the situation slowly washing over me. Harrison had not outsmarted me. He had unwittingly walked straight into a trap my father had built years ago. I did not just have the money to fight him. I literally owned the debt that was keeping his entire venture capital firm afloat. If I called in that loan, his entire fabricated world would collapse overnight before I could fully process the immense power I now held. Mitchell picked up a secure phone on the console and pressed a single button. "We need counsel in the vault immediately," he said quietly. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy steel elevator doors slid open again. A woman walked in carrying a sleek leather briefcase. She was tall in her mid-40s with sharp features and an impeccably tailored suit that screamed absolute authority. Mitchell introduced her as Veronica, a razor-sharp corporate financial lawyer, retained exclusively by the trust. I reached into my damp pocket, pulled out the crumpled commercial loan statement Jamal had secretly handed me on the porch, and placed it on the concrete table. Veronica did not ask any pointless questions about my ruined clothes or my muddy shoes. She simply opened her briefcase, pulled out a high-resolution scanner, and digitized the wrinkled paper. The document instantly appeared on the massive central monitor. Veronica typed a rapid sequence of commands, bypassing multiple banking firewalls to access the original digital loan application Harrison had submitted 30 days ago. She isolated the final page of the contract and zoomed in heavily on the collateral agreement. The screen displayed a high-definition scan of a notarized deed transfer. At the very bottom, next to Harrison's bold handwriting, was my own signature, or at least an incredibly desperate attempt at it. Veronica leaned closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the digital ink with predatory focus. "This is a complete fabrication," Veronica stated, her voice as cold as ice. "The pressure points on the pen strokes do not match your historical banking signatures. Harrison forged your name on this document and transmitted it across state lines to secure these funds. He has committed federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe bank fraud." Veronica turned to face me, closing her laptop with a sharp snap. "We can contact the federal authorities right now, Claire. With this undeniable evidence, agents will raid his office by noon, and he will be sitting in a federal holding cell by dinner." The option was deeply tempting. The thought of seeing Harrison in handcuffs today sent a thrill through my chest. But as I thought about him and Kendall laughing at me in the freezing rain, a darker realization took root in my mind. Sending him to prison today was entirely too quick. It was too merciful. I did not want him to just lose his freedom. I wanted him to lose absolutely everything he loved first. "Do not call the authorities yet," I told Veronica, leaning back in the plush leather chair with a new dangerous confidence. "Let him spend the stolen money. Let him inflate his arrogant lifestyle until he is completely trapped. We are going to tear his empire down piece by piece." Veronica smiled. It was a sharp, predatory grin that perfectly mirrored the new dangerous energy surging through my veins. She closed the digital ledger on the massive central monitor and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the concrete table. She understood exactly what I wanted. We were not going to rely on the slow bureaucratic wheels of the federal justice system to punish him. We were going to build a massive financial guillotine and let him eagerly pull the lever himself. Over the next 2 hours, sitting in the absolute security of that underground vault, Veronica and I mapped out a complete financial siege. I authorized her to deploy a fraction of the trust's massive liquid capital to execute a silent, aggressive acquisition strategy. I authorized Veronica to hire a specialized team of forensic accountants to track every single dollar Harrison moved. We discovered he was using a fragile web of bridge loans to fund his day-to-day operations. It was a pathetic, airish setup, using a complex network of anonymous corporate shell companies. Veronica began quietly hunting down every single outstanding line of credit tied to Harrison's venture capital firm and Kendall's commercial real estate business. We bought his equipment leases. We systematically bought out the lenders holding his bridge loans. We acquired the debt on the expensive servers powering his office, the lease on his imported espresso machines, and even the financing on the high-end artwork he hung in his lobby to impress potential clients. We even bought the secondary financing Kendall used to fund her expensive broker wardrobe. Within 48 hours, my holding companies legally owned every single financial obligation Harrison had to his name. I was his absolute master, yet he was completely oblivious, dancing wildly on a trapdoor I controlled. While I was quietly buying up the very foundation of his life, Harrison was busy celebrating what he wholeheartedly believed was his ultimate victory. Assuming I was still sleeping in my ruined 10-year-old sedan and begging for spare change outside budget motel, he shifted his arrogant spending into complete overdrive. Believing the forged $2 million loan provided an endless safety net, he immediately signed luxury leases on matching custom-ordered sports cars for himself and Kendall. He rented a massive, entirely unnecessary glass corner office in the most expensive commercial district in the city, signing a 10-year lease he could never actually afford. To stroke his own massive ego and project the image of a titan, Harrison began aggressive, completely unsustainable hiring for his startup. He poached dozens of junior executives and analysts from competing firms, offering them exorbitant signing bonuses. Despite having absolutely no long-term revenue streams to support payroll, he was aggressively bleeding cash every single day, entirely convinced his fraudulent financial maneuvering made him invincible. Kendall was equally intoxicated by the sudden influx of stolen wealth. A week later, I sat in the luxurious high-rise hotel suite Veronica had secured for me, wearing a plush robe that actually belonged to me, and opened my new smartphone. I clicked on a video Kendall had just proudly posted to her public social media feed. She was holding a glass of champagne, giving her thousands of followers a grand tour of the suburban home I had carefully decorated over the last 4 years. She strutted through the living room, explicitly mocking my taste in furniture before holding up her left hand to the camera.